we put ourselves in the position of being between the client and the owner in architecture. And we are the sort of arbiter of all that is good. Good taste, good design, good for the planet, good for the users. It's always going to get denigrated in any business meeting, right? It's like, yes, we agree. Yes, we want to do good things. We want to have good design, but that will require 3 more developers. That will change our target market. When you're in sales, it's always better to sell to raising the top line rather than lowering costs, lowering the bottom line. It's much easier to sell that you're going to increase, sort of revenue. Hi, I'm Angela Shen-Hsieh, and you're listening to GGUTT Talks, GGUTT.
Hi, I'm Maria, and welcome to GGUTT Talks, where we co-create a collective intelligence involving both people who are not always in the limelight and those who are, in order to learn from each other and spread knowledge, creative and critical thinking in the business world. All I ask is to follow or subscribe to the show and get in touch. It helps me know that there are actually people listening and I'm actually not just shouting into the void. Now let's get started. Angela Shen-Hsieh is an entrepreneur, technologist, architect and data visualization designer who loves to think about the future and build things. She led teams to create new innovations with AI and big data. She worked in the corporate world and the startup world and is currently the founder and CEO of Alcōv, a home styling and shopping app. We dive into collaboration and co-creation, design, technology, balance, and more. Here we go.
Thank you so much for this, Angela. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. When I reached out, I was like, there's so much going on in your brains. Your background is in architecture, and then you transition to data visualization. You did many things in the startup world, in the corporate world. So I just want to ask, how does your brain work?
I'm very intuition-led, and then I post-rationalize. But I will always have the intuition first, and then I need to think it out. This doesn't work so well like in meetings because it sometimes takes me time to figure out why I have an initial reaction, but it works very well in life. I think I have a balance of left brain and right brain thinking. My mother is exceedingly practical, just so practical. And my father is entirely idealistic. And so I'm sort of smack in the middle of that in terms of motivation, I guess. I have a motivation to do idealistic things, but in a very practical way.
The question that I ask in all the episodes is kind of a recurring question about your relationship with your gut feeling. But I think you covered that. When I reached out to you, I kind of asked you also, what would you like to talk about? And one of the things you said is collaboration. It's something or a word you're quite interested in. So you talked about the world suffering from a failure of collaboration. So can you share maybe a moment where you realized this kind of failure in collaboration?
So to do almost anything, big things, you need a lot of people. And to do the kinds of things that I work on every day, like, building software, building companies, you need a lot of people. I came out of a training in architecture that's very much about the individual, the master builder, the Frank Lloyd Wright who designed down to the clothing that people were supposed to wear or were allowed to wear in his spaces. That's just not reasonable for current times. There's just so few jobs that are purely individual contributors that you can do it from end to end. I mean, even big companies, a Microsoft or an Apple, they need other people. They need other companies. So I had lots of experiences learning this lesson that collaboration is key. But maybe particularly when I was at IBM and saw that we were trying to sort of collaborate, innovate to be a huge business, and we were matrixed. So it was a matrixed organization, which essentially means that you have to go all the way to the GM to make almost any decision. You spend all your time trying to align across, horizontally, align down, of course, but then align up, and you get everybody beside you aligned, and then your up and down goes out of alignment. We worked a lot on collaboration and how you get the three legs of the stool in software development: design, business, and technology. So UX, product management, and development. How do you get those three to, work together seamlessly so you can collectively solve problems? Because there's lots of problems that you may think it's an engineering problem, but you know what? Design could solve that problem through a better experience to cross a certain bridge, connect to capabilities. Or you could have a business approach, which is to create a partnership that could also bridge some kind of a gap that you have in the product. So that's the kind of goal, is you get all the people at the table to be able to look at these problems together and find better solutions. And it was really hard to do that. It was really hard to do that at IBM. It's a huge company. And we went in the direction of actually creating processes. Like the big organization decided to create IBM Design. And then the IBM, basically a product management model. And the first thing we realized in Watson was all of these processes, methodologies that we're supposed to be using, they all use completely different tools. They're all tool-based, but they're different tools. So as a designer, am I going to go into the rational system to work? No, that's not my system. I've got my own design system, but does development or product management going to work in my system? And so that's where I see a failure of collaboration.
You said big things here, because even though, that was a few years ago, right? I remember when design thinking, IBM Loop came out, but how to navigate this and how to educate internally that design can help.
Yeah.
What are you seeing today compared to before, I would say?
So one of the first problem, I like how you put collaboration as co-creation. That's also a nice way to think of it, because the word collaboration maybe has gotten kind of diluted because it's used so often and across so many different things. I think that at first, getting people to understand what we're talking about in terms of working together, I created a lot of slides on what's the kind of collaboration we need. And I don't think that they made any impact. When I worked at Telefonica, we had a meeting to talk about it was in a big meeting. It was kind of an announcement by the HR group about our equity goal, which was equity and diversity, which was to have some very high percentage of women, to increase the percentage of women executives by a very close date, within a few years. And it was really an ambitious goal. But I thought, well, but we need tools to make that actually effective. And ask that question, are you going to provide us or help us with developing tools? So what I mean is, we have this history from the 90s and the 2000s of kind of getting a seat at the table. But then somehow we haven't been able to keep it. I have an idea about how we can keep it. But it's not just getting diversity to the table. Research has told us that getting different people, and then not just the typical things, diversity, but just, diversity of brain processing, diversity of experience, you'll get better options and make better decisions. But how do you get the people? What do you do when you get them there? Just putting a designer into the room, is that really getting to the goal? No, I don't think so. I think we tried that. And in fact, one of the principles of IBM design was that doesn't work. You can't just drop a designer into a development team and say, okay, you're responsible for all the good things that design should be able to produce. So getting people first to understand that we need something more than just a meeting to produce good collaboration and co-creation, as you say. What I've seen in the last couple of years is that designers are the de facto facilitators for getting people around a process, getting people to workshops. They plan the workshops. They take people through process diagrams. In digital, you've got user journeys and user experience maps and all those kinds of artifacts and the ways of creating those artifacts collectively. And so I think that designers can be the engine for this collaboration that really moves the needle. I have been for the last, 8 or 10 years working on what are those little interventions, processes. I hate to use the word processes because it sounds so yucky. Lots of people don't like that word. But what are the little things that you can do that help to facilitate collaboration? I had a team in Europe, mostly developers. They don't talk much. We were also speaking English for me, and they speak English, but it's not their native tongue. But I needed their input. We needed to make 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, And I had these people, and I needed to get what we needed to get out of these people. There weren't opportunities to bring in a ton of new people to swap people out. It's like, okay, this is a good team. We got to get everything out of them. And so we had like question bursts. So if the room seems like it's we're not really getting to what the key problem is, or we're not getting everything out on the table. It feels like there's resistance, but you don't know what it's coming from. Okay, throw sticky notes around. And I want to see, like, everybody, 3 minutes, just write down everything that's on your mind, all the questions that you have. And it's amazing. It's so simple. And it's a very simple example. But I think those things seem to come from design. And I think design has done a pretty good job over the past, X number of years with design thinking to have a library of techniques and prompts, ways of thinking, frameworks that can facilitate this kind of meaningful and productive collaboration.
Yeah, this way of thinking alone and then together after sharing is quite powerful and can be completely underestimated, because when you have one person in the room dictating, or like a designer finding an email in the morning after working, let's say for, 3 months, 2 weeks, whatever, full on with the team on something very specific. And then there's a strategic decision that's going to affect everything. And sometimes like people or the hierarchy or whatever you want to call it, or even if it's a flat structure, they just don't get it, but you're just designing, right? So this is really hard to convey. So you mentioned a few things here. How do you think that design managed? I don't know if there's an answer to this question. I think it depends on the organizations and everything, but to actually contribute to the elevation of, if you want, decision making and business impact, obviously, by just being there and be able to do maybe little things that can have a bigger impact over time. Maybe a story.
I'm thinking of so many different things. So one position that designers have put themselves in, I learned this a long time ago from being an architect. We put ourselves in the position of being sort of between the client and the owner in architecture. And we are the sort of arbiter of all that is good. Good taste, good design, good for the planet, good for the users. It's always going to get denigrated in any business meeting, right? It's like, yes, we agree. Yes, we want to do good things. We want to have good design, but that will require 3 more developers. That will change our target market. When you're in sales, it's always better to sell to raising the top line rather than lowering costs, lowering the bottom line. It's much easier to sell that you're going to increase, sort of revenue. And I think of this kind of analogously. It's better if we can, instead of just trying to get things to acceptable level of goodness, let's say, we've got to talk about business language. And it's not that designers can't do that. Plenty of designers have fantastic business skills, but when you also have to defend all that's good, I think that that's really tough. I don't know if that's a useful answer.
I think the question is a bit hard to answer because the thing is, there isn't one answer. I mean, I can't remember who I was in conversation with once. And I think I was running a session for people in a consulting company in India. And they were telling me, yeah, here in India, no one gets design. It's really tough, whatever. So the session ended up being just a conversation on how could you do things differently rather than, I always give this example because I have a background in interior design also, I guess you will relate to this. But if you present a 3D rendering to someone who wants, I don't know, a new bedroom, yeah, it's 3D rendering and they will pick on the color of the pillows and the curtains and the sofa, right? Instead of looking at what matters is like how you're going to come into the room and then is the lighting, the natural light good or whatever. And it's the same thing when we design anything. And that's a tough one. But what I also told them, I mean, in Europe also, we have the same challenges. The timing might be different sometimes, depending on the companies, the size of the companies, how international they are or whatever. The challenges are pretty much the same, right?
Yes. And we've been facing these kinds of challenges for so many decades. And I think we made a ton of progress.
Yeah, sure.
As design. And a lot of it has been putting a lot of process around that. Every designer knows that experience of they're just focusing on the blue, the shade of blue. Like, are you kidding me? And so we've got all kinds of ways of setting up the conversation so that the focus is on these 3 things. We create wireframes, which are colorless or, look like they're hand-drawn to convey a sense of early stage, low fidelity. We do all those things. And I hate to say that designers need to change rather than the system needs to change. But again, I'm very practical. And I don't see the system changing to accommodate designers. Although lots of companies realizing the importance of customer experience, that's kind of the door opened to designers, have been forced to figure out how to make design work. It's tough. I mean, the other thing is that designers, I used to be on the board of a design organization here in the US, and we were constantly fighting. There was just so much tension between design being a strategic discipline and design being about production of artifacts. And there's a lot of designers who are, I say, like, we kind of need to give up the fetishization of artifacts, which is super hard. I think in things like service design and now like the UX of AI, there's this more of a separation from design being related to art and artifacts.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an endless conversation anyway, I guess. I started doing short episodes because Gianluca Brignoli is one of the really great designers actually that I look up to. Is really good. And he suggested, like, why don't you do short form something? Just share your insights and whatever. But my take is and I went on this episode and I was like, okay, shall I say this? Shall I cut it? Shall I not cut it? But design, we're talking about this and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're trying here to say that design will change the world or save the world or anything like that. But it's just try to learn from design because it can help you just like designer learns from anywhere else anyway, because that's the space we're in by default. I just want to highlight this because just not to send any wrong messages. I don't know if you have anything to say on this, then we can jump on the AI part that you opened up.
Well, obviously, I think design is everything. I approach design like I approach business as a design problem. It's just kind of the way I was trained, but also the way I was raised to, it's out of experience as well, because the difference between design and art is, art is a personal expression. It's about personal expression. And design is about problem solving. You have to have a problem statement. And so problem solving and decision making, they are the most important skills in life.
Do you think it's always the case of having a problem, or like for innovation, do we always need to have a problem?
I do think that there's experimentation, but you're going to match what makes something interesting. Maybe this is my practical side speaking, is when something that you create matches some problem out there in the world. I mean, kind of going back to, Thomas Edison and he says like 10,000 ways not to do it, ways that don't work. So I guess I would say there's always some kind of problem solution. That's the first step when you're doing a startup, when you're creating a product.
Yes. Yeah. For me, no, I personally don't think there needs to be a problem. Personally, I think sometimes there's an opportunity. Maybe it's a different way of framing it, but or a gap. A gap could be seen as a problem or not, but we're just deep diving here. Like, let's, but I can't see this from my experience so far. I might change my mind, but so far I feel that no, because you also mentioned experimentation. Sometimes you want to try things out. And when you try things out, you discover, and then you discover, there's an opportunity here. And then, okay, let's see if there's room for it to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I just think about the word problem as more general.
It's also a way, sometimes I use jargon when I need to. I personally hate buzzwords, but if I need to use it, I'm going to use it, right? Because sometimes it works. It depends who we talk to, right?
Yes.
So,
yes. It's a good way to shortcut if you need to.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I also give up. I call it give up. I remember when I graduated years ago, my first degree was in product design, even though part of the curriculum, there was lots of interior, but anyway. And I went to this fair and I had my CVs, first job looking for something. And then someone was like, oh, thank you, your CV. So she saw product design. So for her design, so you're a graphic designer. I said, no. I said, yeah. I said, you're a graphic designer. I said, no, I'm a product designer. What's a product designer? I said, yeah, this is what product design is. She said, yeah, it's graphic design. I'm like, you know what? Yes, I'm a designer. And I left. I'm like, if you contact me, guys, I'm not going to bother. It's like,
yeah. So that's talking to someone from a completely different world,
but not receptive even to acknowledge that there's something else.
Yes.
Right. So,
design, my gosh, the word design is just huge.
Yeah. As you said, everything is design. Everything is designed. Everything can be designed. And it's not trying to show off or anything like that as designers, but it's a word. Even developers and engineers use the word design a lot.
Absolutely.
But just in a different way. Different things. So you mentioned the UX of AI. Is this a space you're tapping into yourself? Because I know you do multiple things.
I think it's just a step that we have to head into, and it's good. I think right now I'm talking about like generative AI, because that's
yes. Yeah. Let's specify. Yeah.
People think of now when they think of AI.
Right.
We see a lot of, like, every product has a chat with our AI.
Yeah.
Whatever, bot. Do you ever use those? Do you try them?
It depends. So if it's a platform I'm using, and some are good, like the one of Substack. I moved all my podcasts to Substack recently. I must say it's really good. But if, let's put it that way, a telco company or a bank, I mean, I don't even bother. But this is standard. We know. Like, they're not going to work, right?
Yeah. So
and we know why, right? You just mentioned it, just to go back to the beginning of your conversation. The departments, let's say not always, but frequently, let's say, don't talk to each other. So it just what reflects on the user. This is what we see. So
yeah.
they use that.
So they have to be in the right context.
Yes.
I think we're at this very, very early stage, and everybody feels like they've got to integrate some kind of chat GPT or something. And that's the easiest way to do it. Okay, like we'll just let people ask any questions. But what's in the early days of these kind of virtual agents or, chatbots? I mean, we had to design everything first to get over like a testing hump, because people will test it, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't even know exactly what to ask. So we took that approach, but we quickly realized there needs to be a way to direct people more to the questions that we're able to answer. That doesn't always connect with what the business has in mind. The business has in mind, like they have a very specific metaphor in their head, like, well, we want it to be exactly like somebody calls. But of course, that's two different users, first of all. Someone who calls and someone who is willing to type a question, that's a different user. That's a different context. They're probably, asking different questions. I mean, there's just so many things that need to be kind of reconsidered. And I think this is the phase of where AI needs to find a way to get accepted in society. So I had the chance to work with robots when I was at IBM, and I was meeting with the founder of this kind of very well-known robot company. They make the Pepper robots and the Now robots that SoftBank bought. Very, very beautiful, sort of human-esque robot. And I said, how come you didn't make the robot able to do anything physically? Because they have this robot that stands, right? Has arms, has fingers, has expressions, but it actually physically can't do anything. Like, wouldn't it be useful if the robot had some payload? He could grasp something. And he said, the first thing is to get the robot accepted in society. And so the goal was to be able to have the robot in your home and people get comfortable with having that kind of thing around. And then you can start to add these other capabilities. Maybe we're at that place with Gen AI. It's just going to be, adopted everywhere. I think the experience of having to type a lot of things in, and I mean, it's great. There's a back and forth, but there's missing so much more depending on the use case. And that is not a one size fits all solution. I mean, every user and every designer knows that. In so many cases, text is not the right medium for exchange.
Constantly teaching it, I guess, right? It's not just about prompting. It's about how accurate is the flow and how useful is the result based on the flow. If you can get a flow that flows.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think for design, there's a whole design problem, setting the expectations right for the user to interact with the AI. And then, I mean, I think most people are doing this. You don't take the prompt that the user uses, because people aren't good prompt engineers and they don't even know what's the knowledge base that I'm asking of a question of. So there's an interface there to design between those expectations you're setting, what the intention of the user is, then how that intention is passed into the AI, and then even how it's displayed or given back to answer that query. I think all of those parts need to be touched. And then what does the user do next? It's not rocket science, but there are some really rich design problems. I'll go back to that word for designers to sink their teeth into.
Yeah, definitely. And I think those new, I'm going to call them experiments, right? Of Rabbit, R1 and Humane. I ordered the Rabbit back in January. Obviously, I haven't received it yet because it comes to Europe after. Humane, I didn't. But I mean, I don't know if people will actually use them, but it's a good experiment. And some people ask me, why did you order the Rabbit? I'm like, first, I'm not going to get hooked into a subscription that I know I'm not going to be using. Oops. Oh, okay. Whoever's on YouTube, this is the Apple camera giving it a thumbs up.
That's
some balloons.
Okay, that's pretty smart.
Yeah, there's the balloons as well. Yeah, but the R1, I'm like, I like the pitch. And let's see, I think to understand how things work, we need to try them out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning, if we may just jump back quickly. You mentioned lots of slides, right, about collaboration or co-creation. But then there's this aspect of getting your hands dirty, right? And getting people to get their hands dirty and experiment and see like how little things can help like move forward, even if sometimes they can feel they're moving backwards.
Absolutely.
So what's your take on that? Especially with generative AI now, because we can design or help people collaborate or cooperate with humans, obviously, but also with AI. I'll add one thing to that, just to maybe, so you get my point better. I had a meeting last week with someone from a bank. I proposed like to do something with them. And this person was telling me, we have lots of trainings, but when we leave the room, we just forget about it. This is common, right?
Yes, absolutely. People who are, let's say, kind of related to this space, and really even people who are not, or particularly people who are concerned about AI, either in a existential way or the AI might take their jobs, you need to use it. You need to see what it's doing to better understand, the potential pitfalls. I have this crazy, idealistic, hopeful thought that AI should be able to free up a lot of our time. And if we have more time, we can design a better work and life experience. So you asked me at the beginning, what do I sort of officially do? And I told you I've been thinking a lot about the sort of future of work and what that means to people. I'm also at an age where I'm more interested in experimenting with different kinds, because I've already done the several things I know working for a big company. I know working in startups. And now I'm kind of like, gee, there's all these things out there that I'm interested in doing. Can I do them at the same time? Can I work on several things in parallel? I mean, probably just like you are, and so many people are. And AI is kind of crucial to that, because you need kind of a co-collaborators for some types of things, and you need to buy yourself back more time. Now, if we could buy ourselves back more time, I mean, problem is, how does this come out economically? How does that trickle down? Immediately when I saw like ChatGPT, I thought universal basic income. Can this enable universal basic income so people can actually do some of the things that give more meaning to their lives? There's these statistics about, I just saw something about young people, Gen Z, how they're the most dissatisfied generation with their work, but they're not apathetic. They want more meaningful work. They want to work, but they want more meaningful work. And I mean, anybody who's in the startup world knows that, because everybody under 30 is working on something that is trying to improve people's health, trying to improve the environment, trying to, solve big problems. And that's what gets them up in the morning. So how do we take advantage of this technology, which at the end is automation? So we all know automation. We've been working on automation for a long time. How do we take this sort of transformative automation and enable it so bigger and better societies? It's kind of obvious, like we have to do that, but I don't know, the mechanism, and especially through politics today, seems really to be a challenge. Here in the US, we're not focused on those things. We're focused on all kinds of other crazy things.
Yeah, outside the US, basically. I'm not an optimist when it comes to politics and world politics. I'm very pessimistic, actually. I don't know if I'm pessimistic or realistic. I don't know, actually. And I can't put in any bucket. So,
right. Well, when I was a kid, my father said, you have all this education. You went to schools that people know the names of. You should go into politics. Why don't you go into politics? And I remember even my husband said his third grade teacher told him to be like a US senator. That's what you should be aiming for. So in previous generations, that was something that people weren't aspired to give back, to do sort of good in the world. And I'm wondering, then seemed to have taken a different turn. But, here in the US, we also have a lot of young politicians. I can't believe they want to go into something like politics, but we have young politicians who really want to fix things. And we have this young generation who's pretty focused on that, I think. Maybe that'll be our savior.
Yeah. Also, you know what? So I started getting interested in politics when I was 12. So I was reading all the international and national newspapers, magazines, watching whatever was on TV. It was before YouTube and I don't even think it wasn't even there. And I wanted to go into politics when I was 16 and 17. Thankfully, I changed my mind when I was 18, and I'm really glad I went into design because we have the chance to do so many things because design's everywhere. And we can feel maybe that's a question actually, more the responsibility of designing, I don't know, humane products, services, experiences. But now with AI, and I know it's because it's a hot topic today, I know at some point it can get out of control somehow. We don't control everything.
Yeah.
But we have the responsibility of keeping people in mind, right? Like above anything else.
Right.
And I know that you told me actually that you were part of the EU high-level expert group on AI. So what was, maybe you had some unexpected takeaway on that? Maybe you can touch on the responsibility side of it, because the EU is quite active when it comes to regulations and so on.
It's amazing how out in front the EU got on this topic. I mean, starting with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. I probably said that phrase 12 times a day when I was in Europe.
Really?
Yeah, the first year I was there, it was being rolled out, and it was like Y2K. I mentioned that to my son, and he said, "What's Y2K?" Anyway, so
the focus of the, I mean, lots of people, especially in the startup world and innovation space, they're always saying, "Okay, great stuff, but can we please move faster?" Because it's limiting many companies.
I think that's the problem. Is this stuff is moving so fast. I mean, just look at how far it's come from last year at this time. So just leaps and bounds. And of course, that's not how politics works. But what I took away, so I had the opportunity to be on this sort of reserve committee. It's kind of like a subcommittee. It's kind of like where they put the industry people. I did think that was a little bit of a problem, because you had the sort of big minds of the technologies and of the sort of nonprofit side, the policy side, but you didn't have the practical, you didn't have so much of the practical input from people who were going to be much, much closer to it, which is like businesses, businesses that have the data. Those businesses are all in the West Coast here in, the US and China now. They're the ones who are really going to push AI. And of course, plays out like that. And you need to keep that. I wish there had been more of a consideration of the speed at which business will work and the drivers, and the motivations that are going to play out. But the thing that was really remarkable, and then it gives me some hope, is that what I love is that in the EU, so in these conversations, we would talk about European values. And at first I thought it was just a quaint expression. To an American ear, it sounds very idealistic. It sounds very quaint. But then I realized it was a very serious thing. It's an actual thing. There is a value system, and EU members have agreed upon it, that there's a collective over, individual, say, like profits of any business, for example. I realized we don't really have that in the US. In the US, we have individuals as, people, and then we have individuals as businesses. Like a business is considered an individual in our sort of legal system. Where's the common collective? What's for the good of the collective? Because you need to weigh the collective against the individual. And I felt like that was like this is just maybe my naivete and my lack of understanding of different political systems. But I felt like, well, these kinds of regulations are going to they're leading the forefront, and lots of countries and regions are adopting them. And they do have built in this concept of the collective good. And if you can just get that right, is what we need. It's kind of a little bit dumb, but it was like a big eye opener to me. You could make choices that balanced both a collective over individual. And it's not just about fairness. It's a much more nuanced way than what we have here. I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm getting into an area where I don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems like in the US, we have a legal code that is a stand-in for our moral code. Because maybe it's because we're a melting pot and we have so many different backgrounds coming together. We don't have a common accepted understanding of sort of standards and ethics and morality. And so we try to put that into our legal code.
And what you're saying is interesting, because I don't know what this is going to sound like, but if you were a designer, maybe you would have forgotten this concept, or I wouldn't say you would have forgotten. You wouldn't have focused or absorbed and tried to understand that there is kind of a European values and standards and a moral code and so on to take into consideration. It would have been something as part of the text that you wouldn't have highlighted. And maybe the fact that, maybe because I'm not trying to sell designers here or anything, but the ability of picking up on things that could matter and highlighting them and asking the right questions, right, can help. And this is why you're bringing it up, I guess. This is why having a designer as part of the team, this could be helpful, at least to learn something new. Let's just put it that way in our context of design.
Yeah. I don't know whether policy people think about it, but of course, designers would think about policy as a design process. It's very much a design process, right?
And one thing, so I was at a conference a few years ago where it's pretty much conversations, moderated conversations, but you have people from different companies and from lots of NGOs and the UN and places like that. But they were talking about some laws and regulations that passed maybe 40 years ago today. And for me, really? So for me, it's like there was a gap even in the conversation that maybe not many can see, because the understanding of doing things is just discussing rather than trying things out. Even with two people in a room and improvising, prototyping something quick on paper or a role play or whatever that may be.
Right.
So I don't know how it felt there for you.
Yeah.
Because it's a kind of, let's say it's more recent topic, right? AI.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently went to a talk about the policies. I guess they call it cluster policy in Barcelona, it's kind of an economic policy to try to develop certain industries in localities. So like here in Boston, there was a pretty successful cluster strategy around biotech. But what I loved listening to in Barcelona, which has they have, 20 or 30 clusters that they developed. It was really a design process. It was so iterative, and they could talk about it to me the way designers talk about, well, we tried this and then we realized there was this kind of issue. And part of it is try to get all the different parts of the government to work together, because it's not just like giving money to certain companies or giving benefits to certain companies. It's also understanding the whole ecosystem and at many levels. And I just loved hearing about that, because that's like a big problem, a big goal. But they quickly realized that they had to be very, very iterative about it, test and iterate, try a lot of things. And I think that's why they were successful where a lot of localities and regions were not.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation on its own.
Another area that I know that.
Yeah. No, it's good, because I wanted us to explore different areas, because there's lots of contamination. I don't know if I like the word, but
absolutely. I mean, that also is something that designers tend to bring in, the cross-contamination or the metaphors and frameworks and mental models. We talk a lot about mental models and how people understand things. And there's lots of researchers who will say there's no such thing as, like, your brain will always associate something with something else. That's how it identifies it, with its respect to something else that it knows. So you need that to keep creating and innovating.
Yeah. And I guess we spoke about collaboration and larger organizations, and then public policy a little bit. But then what's missing is the startup world, I guess. And maybe you can expand on what you're doing, because you have a startup yourself, which is called Alcōv, right? And I invite everyone to check your TikTok, because this is where you're mostly active on social. But yeah, it's like, you started in architecture, and then you went into the whole digital space, AI space, consulting, whatever. And then you came back now, and you're going back to physical spaces. So can you share more? Like,
I know. There is a through line there. In architecture school, I actually did my thesis on design as shopping. So my contention was that actually we think we're creating, wholly out of our brain something totally new, but it's actually a shopping process. And especially for the layperson, design of physical spaces is entirely a shopping process. So I love this idea that you could convey ideas through things that people buy rather than just through like art, which is very precious. And so anyways, after all this experience, through the pandemic, our physical spaces became so much more important to us. And I was doing a lot of helping people I know and my family get spaces set up. And so I started this company. We have an app. It's in a closed beta right now. And
I signed up.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm waiting.
And it's designed to help. I mean, our target audience is young people, but it's designed to help people style their spaces and buy furniture. And so it is a design experience that is wrapped in a shopping experience, because shopping is what we know. Like, we know how to do that, but non-designers don't know how to design. And after a lot of research and trial and error and thinking about it, I felt like the design process, as we know it, like for interior design, it's not really, I don't think it's appropriate to try to take a layperson through a professional process, a process that a professional would use. So I'm trying to take them through a design experience by couching it in shopping.
How did you start? Because there are different ways of starting a startup. And you're not just doing that, right? You do different things. Yeah.
This is so dependent on customer acquisition. How do you get people to use it and stick with it? And because of that, it's entirely dependent on design. So we started with like, what is the experience? Could we really describe it? And we did not raise money. I haven't raised money because we've been able to bootstrap the building of it. And then we're going to develop metrics. I mean, I'll tell you, I've raised money before, but in a different space. I mean, it was analytics. It was software, it was B2B software. We had a lot of big pharma and healthcare clients, but this is totally different because on the consumer side, especially in a space that kind of feels feminine, interiors, boy, I found it a very different experience. I feel like we're going backwards in terms of, even with all of the talk about trying to get more women on boards and trying to get more women investment. And here in Boston, there's a statistic that women get 0.9% of all the venture capital in Boston. That is a statistic that has been out in the environment for a while. And it was such a shocker. But basically, I think for this thing that we're doing on the consumer side, it is very much about traction. You got to show traction. And this goes back to the fact that it's just hard to explain design. So it's not really that helpful to show someone the design and ask them on their own kind of gut feel, because the design is really unique, that, they've got something special here. It's going to be about, well, what are the metrics? What's their monthly active users? What does the conversion look like? All of that. So,
because is it a continuous, let's say, journey? Like or you come in and out because people are going to download the app because they have a need right now, or it's something they want to eventually do in the next weeks or month. But then once they start shopping, let's say, what happens after? How do you keep them engaged?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to keep people engaged. There is a long tail of decor. You get the sort of basics in there. And then I need a few little things here and there to start to kind of, pull it together. Lots of people don't get art, particularly, young people. They've got empty walls. Also, the overwhelming percentage of people buy furniture because they want to spruce things up. Do you know that expression?
No, but I assume
you know what it means.
They want to spice it up.
Exactly. They just want some change. I just did something in my living room. I don't know why I hadn't done it before, but I just rearranged what I had, bought a couple new things, and it's like a new space. I mean, my husband and I walk through it every day and we're like, oh my God, it's like having a new house,
Yes, some people, my auntie's like that. Every few months, she likes to rearrange things. I mean, there are lots of people like that. So
yes,
I guess you're taking this shopping experience as we know it for.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. There's a long tail, but also there's a group of people who really love to help other people, to comment. There's a subreddit that people can post what they are interested, some kind of problem they have with their space and ask for opinions. I think until recently, you couldn't even really post photos, but it has like 600,000 followers. So there are a lot of people. Our research, almost everybody asked somebody else when they were buying something, they asked somebody else for help, right?
That's so true. Yeah.
You send your girlfriend a picture of something. You're in a store. You take a picture of it. That's what Pinterest is for, right?
Yes. What you're going to do with all the data?
Yeah, I think that there are some business models around the data. It's very important to me, by the way, that we always balance out the value provided back to data providers. So I think a lot of things that we can do with the data that, enable the app to be free, that enable better personalization, that can even enable better personalization when you go to other shopping sites. I mean, there's a little thing here that I'm super interested in, which is really understanding style. It's a little bit of a holy grail of data, trying to understand what are people's style. You try to apply it for things like Netflix, like what's the style of movie or, TV show that people want to watch. That doesn't apply, that doesn't apply to other things. It doesn't apply. You can't take clothing and apply it to your house either, surprisingly. It doesn't really cross over with like food, although there are generalities that you could make.
That's a big question, actually. It's a big question.
It's that. Yeah.
It's a big question because it can be somehow influenced by what you've seen in your life that you can't even remember of, or what you see while scrolling all the time.
Yeah.
It can be very temporary as well, or ephemeral.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Actually, people are pretty open to style in a sense. Within an alley, let's say, we're targeting a fairly tight audience, which enables us to get closer to style.
Yeah, this is just taking me back to university days or when I worked a little bit in interior design, when you ask people to give you some pictures of what they like to understand, right? And they get things that are completely not related, right? So they don't match.
Like also the words. In one of our first rounds of interviews, we asked people, how do you describe your style? And every single person said modern. In the first sentence or two, the word modern came up. What is modern? For us, we would say like, well, there's modern with a capital M. That's totally different than modern as in contemporary,
And this goes back to prompting mid-journey. There are words it does not understand because it's not in the dictionary, let's say, or doesn't have any kind of visual related meaning, let's say. So big question. I'm gonna be following what's happening. It's an interesting space, actually, what you're trying to achieve here. It's bigger than creating a shopping experience. Yes, this is a great start. I mean, it's true. The way we shop for furniture is different, right?
It is different. And it's really hard. Furniture, first of all, you're spending a lot of money. No matter what your budget, you're spending more money than you want to. And you have to get all these pieces to fit all of these requirements: style, space, budget, and like timeline. So people always have all these stories about, oh, I had a vision for like my office was going to be all white. But then when I went to buy furniture, this is also, younger people. So they're moving into apartments and they don't want to wait months for a piece of furniture. But, they went to whatever, Amazon or whatever, and they only had black. They wanted in black. Okay, now I'm changing my whole plan. Oh, the sofa was twice as much as what we thought, so we couldn't get a coffee table, or we had to do something more makeshift, or
you can provide financing options then. There we go.
Yeah, that's definitely an angle. It's actually a hard problem, but it's a fun problem for people to solve themselves. You get a lot of satisfaction from that.
Because you're going to get lots of compliments, hopefully.
Yes. I mean, it makes a difference to your well-being. I think especially now, where we spend more time at home, we need it kind of as a haven, especially young people. So that's what we're working on.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I am conscious of your time. If there's a piece of advice you would like to give or share, or someone shared with you, or something you experienced and want to share your wisdom.
I can go in so many different directions on that question. I think I'll say something that's a little bit out of, not quite about design. It's more about like designing your life, I guess. But one thing is I don't believe in regret. I think it really weighs me down. So one thing I realized at some point in my career where I was faced with things that were something that was really difficult in front of me was that I didn't want to not cross that difficult divide and then in the future look back and say, you know what? that was right there in front of me. Like I just needed to do this difficult thing to get over that next step. And that has gotten me through a lot of difficult times because I see it as, well, I don't want to look back. I don't want to look back and regret not having just gone that extra step, taken that next step. I don't know if that's useful.
Yeah, it is actually in a way. And it's making me think, because before we got started, you mentioned you're a former gymnast and you're always looking for the right balance.
Right. Yeah. I'm always trying to find this balance between all kinds of seemingly opposing, forces. It's terrible living here right now in the US because we're so polarized. And I'm always trying to find that balance between intuition and rationalization, or subjective and objective analysis. We talked about the individuals and the collective, the micro and the macro, the balance of right brain and left brain thinking in startups and in work. I think between like speed and friction, I think you need friction. Speed, it's kind of like, oh, well, of course you need speed. But I used to work with someone who used to call speed running with scissors. There's long-term and short-term decision-making based on how fast the feedback cycle is, work and play. Also, I'm thinking a lot about, I'm kind of sandwiched between like every day I work with 20-year-olds, but then I'm also, very involved with taking care of my parents and my mother-in-law. And so between like, how do you balance what the older generation can give us and what the younger generation can also, I want to balance all those things. I want to synthesize all of that. And that sort of goes back to collaboration, I think.
Always comes back to collaboration. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. If someone wants to reach out to you, where can they find?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Shen-Hsieh. Watch the spelling of my last name. Also Angela at edits.com. That's the easiest address.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.